Hello and welcome to the Bucketlister Podcast. Join your host Keith Crockford, along with special guests who have travelled the world, here to share stories of their adventures and plenty of inspo to add to your bucket list. Now, let's get into today's episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Bucketlister Podcast. I am your host, Keith Crockford, and today I am chatting with Nancy Frey. Hello, Nancy.
Hello, Keith. How are you?
Very well, thank you. And this podcast is really come about from what was a bit of a chance meeting. Well, not so much of a chance meeting, but it was really interesting because the topic we're going to be talking about today is the Camino de Santiago. And I know that if any of you listen to the podcast regularly, I did an episode on multi-day trekking a few weeks ago. And one of the trips that I was talking about that we want to run at the Bucket List Company is part of the Camino de Santiago. Now, a week after I recorded that podcast, I went out and did our whitewater rafting trip to in Morocco. And one of our guests, Nancy, who is with me today, was on the trip. And I then found out that Nancy runs a trekking company that delivers treks to the Camino de Santiago. So I was like, well, this couldn't be any better put together. And I thought, what better person to bring onto the podcast to discuss it than Nancy? So here we are, Nancy. First, how was the trip to Morocco before we start?
Oh, top. It was a real delight, Keith, to see it through the bucket list and have those experiences with those incredible, well-sourced local guides, truly back roads, unique moments that I and my son will never forget.
Sounds perfect. And I think you're probably one of the bravest people that I've ever met, because actually, Nancy stayed on for a few days after the trip, and then she told me she had hired a car in Marrakesh to go traveling around in. How was the car journey? Was it okay?
The car journey was great. I was thrilled when I saw the car because it had nearly 200,000 K on it and more dents than I could ever put in it myself. And that just gave me free rein to just go for it. And driving, it's all about flow, Keith. You just have to get in there and flow. And that's a lot like life.
Yeah, exactly that. So obviously, as you can hear from Nancy's accent, Nancy is from America, now living in Spain. Nancy, just start off with, A, how did you end up in Spain? And B, what was your original attraction to the Camino?
I've now been in Spain for half my life, and it is directly related to the Camino de Santiago. And I was at UC Berkeley. I'm from California originally, studying and doing my PhD in cultural anthropology. And in the early 1990s, before it became an international phenomena, I decided to go to Spain and discover my project. And I went to Santiago de Compostela. It was all pretty instinctual. And I discovered that the pilgrimage was back underway, and it had been for a number of years, been evolving into this remarkable journey from its medieval roots, but in the late 20th century with a very different character, with people wanting to undertake, not like a traditional pilgrimage site like we think of Lourdes in France or Fatima, which are very much more for the devout, the Catholic devout. And this was much more of a broad range of travelers, walkers, people on spiritual, personal, inner journeys, and recreating the medieval journey. They were walking hundreds and hundreds of miles across Europe to get to Santiago. And it was clear that this pilgrimage was different in that it wasn't about the site of the arrival, like at the shrine, but about this journey. And so the whole focus becomes the process of walking in this journey along the way. So my research took me to Spain, and I fell in love with Spain, and I fell in love with a Spaniard, and life took a complete right turn. And I found myself in Spain wanting to completely reinvent myself, and began a walking tours company. And I've been leading walking tours along the Camino, sharing my knowledge, as a cultural guide, walking for nearly 25 years.
It's an amazing journey that you've taken from there. I mean, what was it originally that attracted you to Spain and the Camino itself?
I was originally attracted because I was looking for a project that was related to contemporary spirituality. It was one of my focus interests. And I wanted to, and this fit all of the criteria for me that was interesting. And the fact that for my research in anthropology, cultural anthropology, one of the primary techniques that you employ for your research is something called participant observation, which means that in order to understand something, you actually have to do it. You can't just study it from a book. It's a bit like having sex. You can read all you want about it, but you don't understand it until you actually practice it. So it's the same thing in anthropology. You have to do the things to understand them. And so that meant that I had to go and walk this pilgrimage myself as part of my research. And as a young woman in my 20s, the idea that my academic intellectual work would require me to walk about 500 miles across northern Spain seemed like a pretty remarkable thing. So I went to it thinking that I'm just going to be studying everybody else. I'm going to be there with my notebook, talking to people. How is it going? What's happening to you? And when I came into it, I then discovered that, wow, the pilgrimage has a way of working on you and sweeping you up like a wave. And once you're in it, you can't really stop the flow of that, like swimming up a river or trying to swim down. You can't control that. And I went through my own very profound personal experience, and that helped inform and be a much better researcher because I was using my own experience as a guide way. And all of these apertures and openings and my own insights was a reflection of things that were happening exactly with other people. And that became part of my book, Pilgrim Stories on and off the road to Santiago de Compostela, which is about people's journeys. And that's what I reflected in this work. And that's how I came to Spain and how I continue to remain in Spain, wanting to be connected with those journeys of transformation that are a part of each person's experience.
So just talk us through, because obviously, a lot of people will trek the Camino de Santiago. Now, a lot of trips, and probably the trips that we're going to run, are going to be a shorter section or part of it because, like you just said, what's the actual total distance of the full trek?
Well, this is one of the things, Keith, is that you have to understand that it's kind of a misnomer to say Camino de Santiago, because there's actually the Caminos de Santiago. Santiago is the end point, but literally when you leave your home door, and that's traditionally what it was, that is your Camino. So imagine that historically in the medieval era, and this is what a lot of people are following, these old pilgrimage pathways, it was all of these people leaving from their homes in the UK, their homes in France, their homes in Belgium, their homes in Italy, wherever they were, and they were picking up these pathways and funneling into Spain and to Santiago. And not only that, but of course, the people within Spain. So there's pilgrimage pathways that are called the Camino, and these Caminos de Santiago. You could start in Seville in Spain. You can start in Portugal and in Lisbon. You could start in Rome, in Italy, anywhere. You could start in multiple places in France. In the UK, you could actually go down to Dover and get a ferry and go down to Coruña and walk down. So it depends on what you really want to do. There are many, many, many paths. The one that you're asking about, the one that kind of everyone that set everything off is called the Camino Francés, the French way. And that is, there were 4 traditional routes in France that funneled into Spain. And what became popular, and for example, in the movie The Way with Martin Sheen, is a distance about 780 kilometers, about 450 miles. But that is just one possibility of this pilgrimage way.
So which one did you start with then? When you first went out there, where was your journey? Which journey did you take when you arrived?
Well, when the pilgrimage became what I call reanimated, it received new life again in the late 20th century, the most popular way was the Camino Francés. That was the one that began to be restored and redeveloped. So that was the one I was on. And one of the tours that I run I call it the Grand Tour of the Camino, is sections from in the Pyrenees. That's the 780K is from the Pyrenees, a place called Roncesvalles, to Santiago de Compostela. And that is the one that has the vast majority of the historical, cultural monuments directly related to the rise and development of the pilgrimage, and is incredible.
And in terms of, like, obviously you've been there now, 20 plus years delivering these tours. How have you seen it change in terms of, how busy is it now compared to what it was? Are people setting up, has the accommodation improved to keep up with demand? Like, how have you seen it over those 25 years?
It's been just dramatic, massive change. But it's always kind of incremented supply and demand. And there's always been kind of a sense of, even from the early days, that there needed to be more. One of the perennial concerns about some people walking was, will I have a place to stay? The concept of this concern. And then, of course, when cell phones become and internet becomes big, and this is a huge, I've written a lot about the rise of the internet and the impact of the internet. To me, that's the biggest change. But that changed like the whole booking system. When it started back in the 90s, people were staying in donation-based centers, municipal accommodations. And then, of course, demand created a whole private market. And so now there is an enormous private market of what they call albergues. And these are specific pilgrims accommodations. Sometimes they're bunk rooms. Sometimes they're just rooms in private rooms, and you can book ahead and you can plan your whole journey. In the past, you couldn't plan your whole journey. It was self-serve, but now you can have it all mapped out. You can have it completely set, and you can just arrive. You can have places booked, and you just walk from place to place. So it's changed a lot.
In terms of doing it self-sufficiently or doing it with a group, with a guide, what do you think are the pros and cons? Obviously, you've done it independently on your own originally. Now you run guided tours. What do you see are those differences between doing them in those ways?
I am a very firm believer, and I that there's no right way to do the Camino. It's very important that each person evaluates, what do they want to get out of the Camino? What are they comfortable with? What are they looking for in an experience? And if somebody wants to just have a solo experience and they want to be on their own and they want to just have this individual journey, it's very easy to go and do this trek on yourself. This is not difficult to plan or organize. If you do, though, like the idea of having other companions, and when you go alone, you're always going to be meeting people. But sometimes people like that security or that knowledge that I have a built-in group that I'm going to be walking with and enjoying. And that is a wonderful benefit. And depending on the type of the tour, there are some that are just kind of infrastructure. So you'll go and you kind of meet up. And so you have that sense of comfort that you have it all in place for you. And then, like, for example, my tours, which I consider to be, you don't see this unique, it's kind of a unique market where I am really giving you, and most people don't get this, is the full cultural background, the historical background, the flora, the fauna, the architecture, the legends, the stories, the juice, the heart. What is the Camino? Why was it so big, and why is it so popular? Oftentimes, when you're walking on your own, all you're thinking about is your feet, your fatigue, your pack. You're getting there, and that's a whole nother experience. And you just don't even have time to think about that other. So everything has pluses and minuses, and you just need to kind of evaluate that yourself. What do I want? What am I looking for? What do I want to do? No right way.
And in terms of your favorite sections, then obviously, we discussed it when we were in Morocco that you don't run the full trek, the really long ones. You kind of condense them all down now. But which are your favorite sections? And with your knowledge, which would you like, if you were going to say to me, Keith, like, this is the trip you should run, this is the one that you should do with the bucket list group? Like, obviously you've been a bucket lister, you know what our groups are like, you know what our groups are looking for. Which sections kind of do you think are the must see ones?
Well, I created that tour already. That's my grand tour, and that is the Camino Francés. And that's specifically, selected highlight sections over 800 kilometers, seeing all of northern Spain, and from the forests of Roncesvalles, of Navarra, to the wine country of La Rioja and Pamplona, and then the big Meseta, this open, vast cereal country. And then you come back to these woodlands and the hills and the challenge of the hiking, and Galicia. And one thing I was going to add too about, so what are the changes? I said that Camino Francés was the most popular one, and that was historically the case. But now the Camino Portuguese has become very popular, and it's almost rivaling the Camino Francés because of the distance. And there's some really beautiful sections. Like, for example, you can do the coastal Camino of Portugal, coming up from Porto. And there are some really great sections, and it's not so long. And that is a great trip to do, coastal and interior Portugal. So I would say either one, the Camino Francés or the Camino Portuguese. But all of them have a lot of beautiful sections.
And so your grand tour then, how long is the grand tour?
11 days.
11 days. And how many kilometers is that walking during that tour?
We do about 150.
Okay. That's, yeah. And then in terms of carrying your kit then, how do obviously if you're doing the tour independently, you're going to be carrying everything yourself. How do your tours run with that?
If you're doing it independently, you can carry it independently. You can carry it yourself, or you can book ahead now. There's transport services. So you could walk with a small pack during the day and have your luggage passed on ahead of you if you are doing it on your own, just to make that little difference there. And on our tours, yeah, it's about you get your stuff transported for you. You're eating well, you're dining well, drinking well, accommodations that also represent some historical buildings, things that add to the flavor of the whole experience.
And, obviously I love Spain. I've got 3 weeks in Spain next month. I'm in the south of Spain, not the north. But, the one thing I love about Spain, obviously apart from the wine, is also the food. And I know that's a big part of your trips as well, isn't it? Is the gastronomy in Spain.
Absolutely. Itself. You go to Spain to enjoy your palate through all of your senses, and that is a true delight, is introducing people. People always feel good. We get sometimes celiacs or people who have special circumstances, and they say inevitably they always feel better when they're in Spain because there's such an emphasis on local product, non-processed foods, fresh vegetables, everything just really well done. Not a lot of the, processed materials that you'll get in other countries. Just good.
Yeah, I think that's the. I mean, I'm really looking forward to running a trip out and doing this, because it's one thing that's been on my bucket list for a long time. And also as well, I think, we're in a world where we are now with, we're trying to be a more sustainable company. We know our clients are thinking about sustainability, and obviously we've got these amazing treks that are almost on our doorstep in terms of, we haven't got to do a 14-hour flight to get to Nepal to go out and do a trek. There is other things on our doorstep. And I just think it has so much more to offer, and one that, we really want to be adding, because, again, if people wanted to be totally sustainable, you could get the train down from London, you could get the ferry down to Santander. Like, you've got options to get to you without having to fly. And we get so many customers saying, I want to do one of your trips, but you have to fly on all of them. Well, this is one that we could put on where you don't need to fly.
Right. And you could. I didn't mention the Camino del Norte, but the Camino del Norte is really beautiful. That's the northern way, and it goes along the northern coast, a bit inland from Santander, from Bilbao, actually further east, San Sebastian, Bilbao, through Santander, and that is another really beautiful trek. And another element I wanted to just, you might get questions from people who want to know, well, I want to get the Compostela certificate, because that is what I've heard is doing the Camino, is getting the certificate. And I didn't mention that because that's not a priority to me. But for many people it is. It's how the Camino evolved. A lot of people understood that doing the Camino is getting the certificate. And what I mean by that is that historically there was something called the Compostela. And in the past, sometimes people were sent to the Camino to pay for a religious or a civil crime. And they would need to go to Compostela, and they would need to have this document from the cathedral saying that indeed they had finished. And this was like their salvoconducto, their safe, their certificate to return back and take it to the judge or the priest and say, look, I'm done. And so then you'd be freed of your penance or your whatever crime you were paying. And this, as the Camino evolved in the 20th century, some of the early people, they knew about this, and they started to request this document. And what the cathedral did back in the late 80s and the early 1990s was that they created limitations, some rules. And these are just new rules. They never existed in the past. They're rules from the late 20th century saying that, okay, we have this huge demand. People want this certificate, but we got to limit it. You can't, not just anybody walking in this cathedral can get this certificate. So they said, okay, you have to walk a minimum of 100 kilometers or cycle or go on horseback 250 kilometers. So this then made a new experience of what the Camino is. So many people, so what this did also is that in this radius around Santiago de Compostela, 100 kilometers around a radius, became, there, talk about massification and sustainability and pressure on the Camino. A lot of people said, okay, I want to get this certificate, so I'm going to start at a 100 kilometer point. So you all of a sudden had all these people starting at this place, and that put huge amount of pressure on the Camino in those different starting points that are roughly 100 kilometers. And the thing is, today, the certificate really is, if you're not Catholic, well, I mean, even if you're Catholic, it doesn't actually have anything to do with paying for any crime or in that indulgence system. That's a whole nother issue I can go into if you want, but just for sake of time, I won't explain what all of that is. But it's really a certificate of completion that people can get this document and say, basically, that you've done this journey. So the Camino, though, for me, is so much larger than that. more than getting a certificate. And I understand that a lot of people like that. They want that. And so if you do want that, keep in mind that you need a minimum of probably 5 or 6 days of walking 1 week and this 100-kilometer radius. And know that if you're doing that, you're going to be in an area where there are a lot more people, because that's the concentration of people wanting to get to Santiago for that certificate.
Perfect.
That makes sense?
Yeah, thanks for clearing that. How do you think TikTok and Instagram has changed the Camino?
Well, it's not TikTok and Instagram. You know, I've written extensively. I actually have a whole website. I created a whole website called Walking to Presence, about my observations of the rise of the internet and the impact of the internet on the Camino. And I'm going to explain it like this, and you'll understand it. Is a pilgrimage is a rite of passage. It's a 3-stage process where you have a leaving of your home place. And there's oftentimes a lot of nerves around that, because you've got to, make your bag. You got to figure out, how am I going to get there? All of those pre jitters of, am I going to meet anyone? Am I going to be alone? Am I going to die? Whatever it might be. Am I going to get lost? So, but you make that decision and you leave. Okay. And then the away period, the journey, is where you have an inversion of all of these normal life habits and customs, and you're in a new space. And this is like travel has the same structure. You're in new places, you're meeting new people, everything is maybe potentially strange, your hours are different. And in all of that, it gives you the opportunity for self-reflection or learning or openness or aperture. And then you finish and you return home. And that's the third phase, is this integration. How does this actually impact me? And I'm not the same person as I was. Okay. So historically, when you went on this Camino de Santiago, you left in both body and mind. And pilgrimage is an experience of both body and mind. And you had this bracketed period away. And Keith, you're old enough to remember that you grew up, you had a phase of your life when you didn't have a cell phone, right? And you had a phase of your life.
Half of my life, I didn't have a cell phone. Yeah.
Exactly. And you had a travel experiences where you were away, and you were away in mind and body. Maybe you even wrote letters, postcards. You were not aware of potentially everything happening back home. Your mental connections were significantly reduced. You were present. You were wherever you were. That didn't mean that you couldn't make a phone call or, connect or see the TV, from time to time, but you were where you were, a bracketed time away. Now, in the internet age, and with the rise of the internet, and this is why I say it's not just Instagram or TikTok, it's everything with your cell phone. You are now, before you leave, even before you leave, you can be connected in. You can be chatting with people who are on the way. You can be hearing about them. You can be getting to know places. You can have all these things. And then when you're on the journey, you are, depending on the choices that you make, totally mentally in the same place in some ways, because you're going to be checking your dating app. You're going to be checking the stocks. You're going to be checking the news, your sports teams. You're going to be checking, in with people. You're going to be you outsource a lot of your emotional needs. You outsource to the internet. So imagine that you had a problem on the Camino back in the day. What do I do? I'm lost. Where did you have to go? You had to go in here. You had to go in here to find out the problem. You had to go in and maybe ask somebody local. What do I do? And what do you do now? You just quickly resolve your problem. And so you atrophy your skills. We atrophy a lot. We don't give ourselves opportunities to experience discomfort, boredom, problem solving, things that you need. So
Google Translate's good for everyone, isn't it?
Yeah. So this has made a huge impact because we're very super connected. And the mental experience has been significantly altered. Physically, yes, you still have to walk through it. You still have, your body to remind you that you're right where you are. You have to struggle through those physical pains. And of course, mentally you are too, but it's just different. Very, very different.
When do you think is the best time to trek out there, time of the year wise?
Again, this is very individual depending on people's needs. But personally, I adore spring. I love spring, and but spring is, of course, unpredictable. So, I mean, what do you want? Do you want heat and sun and clear skies, or do you like or not mind the possibility that you're going to have rain and cooler weather? I find that a bit of rain and cooler weather is really, really lovely for walking, but that's individual. You do have school holidays in the summer, so you get more people. Koreans are one of the top 10 nationalities, international nationalities on the Camino, and they all go in January and February, which is a tough time to walk, but that relates to their own school schedules and vacation times. So again, this is individual, but in terms of most people, Europeans have summer holidays in July and August. So even though can be potentially hot in different sections of the Camino, you get a lot of people. And then there are people who are off-season people that, spring, May, April, May, June, are such beautiful months. Those are the most beautiful for me, months. But then the harvest of the fall and September, October, the weather can just be gorgeous. So you really can't go wrong, it's just how you approach it.
And you said about the Koreans there, but which nationality, which are the top nationalities that are doing it at the minute? Who do you see the most? I mean, I know you deal mainly in the American market, is your kind of market that you do for your tours, but which nationalities do you see most when you're running?
In the top 10 are always Spanish, French, German, Italians. Then you start to get USA and then Korea. And Europeans. You see a wonderful international mix.
Perfect. Well, like I said, it's a trip that we really, really want to add in. So we are going to be getting this sorted. And the grand tour, it sounds something like Jeremy Clarkson from Amazon Prime that he would do. But this is, the trip I think we're going to be looking at to run for our bucket list guys. And, we want to get this trip added pretty soon. So if the Camino de Santiago is on your bucket list, then do keep an eye out on our website because it is one that we want to be adding. Nancy, I just want to thank you ever so much for coming on today. It's been really interesting to chat with you. And like you said at the start of this, like when we go to Morocco, we had the most amazing guides on the river that looked after us really well. And that's what we want to do as a company, is look at getting people who are the experts to deliver our trips. I don't think there's anyone more expert really than you, Nancy, with, the fact that you've done your PhD on this topic. That kind of, puts you up there, I imagine. Nancy, one thing I always ask new guests who come onto the podcast is what's left on Nancy's bucket list?
Nancy has a love of the water. And I am, so when you put up, Keith, the Bora Bora Morea trip that you're going to raffle, I'm there on the top of the list, right there. I want to go to the South Seas. That's my dream someday.
Perfect. Lovely. Well, again, thank you ever so much for coming on. Everyone listening, I do hope you found this episode interesting and informative, because I certainly have. I've certainly learned a lot more about it than I did 35 minutes ago when we started this podcast. So thank you ever so much for listening. I'll be back next week with another episode of the Bucketlister Podcast. But until then, thanks very much and goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bucketlister Podcast. Be sure to click follow to be alerted for next week's episode. For more travel inspiration, check us out at www.thebucketlistcompany.co.uk or follow us on socials. See you next time.